Welcome everyone on this new episode of Let's Talk AI. I'm super happy to be back today with Raphaël Hoogvliets. Raphaël, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. Super excited for this episode. For everyone who's tuning in, welcome on the Let's Talk AI podcast, where we discuss with experts about data and AI topics. It can go in depth from a technical perspective, but we really try to tackle all the data and AI field and have a 360 picture. That being said, Raphael, I'm super happy to have you on the show today. I have many questions. We're going to talk about MLOps, career, culture, leadership, and much more in this episode. So stay tuned and feel free to ask any questions that can come along the episode in the comments. That being said, Raphael, maybe for the people who might not know you, could you maybe introduce yourself in a few words?
I'm Raphaël Hoogvliets. I'm 39 years old. I live in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and I'm currently working as a lead machine learning engineer. As a contractor, I work for a client in the Netherlands. It's an energy company big into the energy transition, trying to become climate neutral in 2035. Before that, I used to work as a data scientist, also did some data engineering work. I've been in data for about 9 years now. And yeah, before that, I had a previous career in sustainable agriculture.
Awesome. We'll get into all of this. Maybe I always like to ask this first, but what is your state of the art? And by that, I mean, what are you most interested in the field right now? So my first guess would be MLOps, but maybe I'm wrong. Like, what are you um, working on or interested about in the last weeks?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So definitely MLOps, I'm into. I'm still learning. I feel like I'm still learning every week. I would say it's fairly new, and new practices and approaches are still being developed. And as far as state as the art goes, I'm not much of a bleeding edge technology guy. I'm more of a wait and see because there's always so much going on in the IT space, and now with data and ML, all these things kept popping up over the last 10 years, and now there's this whole different layer with AI. And when I started, I had a bit of FOMO, I guess, or I was a bit
Mm,
overwhelmed.
mm,
I didn't really know where to look, and you had these charts, especially for data and ML, with all these logos and tools, and I was like, oh god, I'm never going to learn this. And I feel the same is kind of happening with Gen AI now. I mean, the basis is kind of set in a sense. It's developing rapidly, but everyone is just like developing these sort of wrappers around the few new tools that we have. But I'm more of a wait and see guy. I'm standing from afar, watching the whole chaos unfold and trying to stay informed. But yeah, let's see
mm.
where it goes. I think this year will be super interesting. Like the last year, things moved super fast, and I think we truly have no clear idea yet of where we'll be in a year from now.
Mm, that's true. We'll be able to discuss that further uh, on uh, on previous questions that I could have in mind. Um, that's very interesting. Like just not being too behind, but just letting like PhDs and research in like very big labs or companies doing like this pushing, and just being just a little bit behind and getting all the conclusions on the go, and not necessarily being like on the latest papers, because it is like if we compare the work that it is to just be informed on every latest technology and things and concepts and so on, compared to the value that it can add to clients, maybe sometimes it's not worth it depending on what we're looking for. I don't know. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. I agree. I think there's so many interesting technologies being developed out there, but to apply them to the real world and to get value out of them, that's a whole other thing. I think the same has been true for a long time with like more basic data solutions like business intelligence and then later machine learning. It's still hard to do it right, like with the right use case and the right context.
Hmm.
Um, Having said that, these tools are interesting. Like I will always mess around a little bit with the tools to see what's what. That's definitely something I'm into. And yeah, I think in terms of the latest state of the art, I think in the coding space we are in a bit of a bubble. So these LLMs, for example, Copilot and a few others, are helping us with our work already. I don't know if they are replacing us yet, but they are assisting us. But when I step outside of our little bubble, like we're in the forums and on social media, and everyone's very informed. But when I talk to my friends and my family, like a lot of them have never touched Chat GPT or anything. Like they know it exists, but they would still like tasks that we would probably outsource to AI. They would still like say like, "Oh, this is such a big task. You know, I don't feel like making this list today or doing this and that." I was like, "Why don't you use ChatGPT?" And they're like, "Oh, I never thought of that." So yeah, I feel like we're in a bit of our own world in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really the point that we can discuss further, which is uh, the labor market. Like, how can like these big questions that all newspaper like to put first page, like title, big title, AI is taking our jobs or something like that. And I feel like this is basically sharing with everyone like how to automate their life and like getting on board of like automating simple things, because if not then you'll definitely get behind. Because when we're at an age of an era where like a lot of things can be outsourced, then I believe that it is a very worthwhile question to just focus on, okay, what am I doing today that I could automate or do it way faster using tools. And I feel that in any industry, we need to tackle these questions, because the best we tackle this one, the less damage if I can speak of damage, we can see in the future on the labor job, or like getting by surprise, like having some jobs that are being replaced by the AI. I don't
Hmm.
know if I express myself as I wish I would here, but do you want to comment on that? Even if we will be able to come back on it further.
So you want me to comment on AI replacing us in the labor market, or?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to comment on that, or do you prefer to keep it for later?
Yeah, maybe for later. I think yeah, we could
Yeah,
talk about it later. Yeah,
awesome.
sure.
I would love to hear about. You have a very interesting background: agriculture, then data science, then you've been as a contractor, a leader in different industries, also a bit of data engineering, MLOps, of course. How, why, can you share maybe like the key moments of your career and like some key lessons on the go?
Yeah, so I was a bit of a beta in high school.
Mm.
Like I liked all the exact subjects and did like programming. I think it was like Pascal and Babash and Basic, some stuff like that. And we played around with databases as well. We had like this simulated databases, and we had to link stuff with keys, and it was interesting. Like I quite enjoyed it, so I thought that's where I would go. And then after high school, I traveled for a bit, and I thought like after traveling, you know, doing this like backpacking tour, like many of us did, I thought I would come back to this degree, and it was called in Dutch medical information science, and basically it was a mashup between medicine and computer science. So you would do both things from both degrees. And like truly like medicine, like you would like you know, dissect like human corpses to learn about the body, and to learn all about anatomy and cell biology and all this stuff. But you would also be coding and learning logic, and like right at the very last point, because while I was traveling I read a few good books, I decided to switch it up and study English literature. So that was like a complete 180. So that was a defining moment, because there was always this dormant beta inside of me who just kind of wanted to code and do math and all this stuff. So it stayed dormant for quite a while. I finished my degree, I did another degree in spatial economics, and there was some statistics in there and some models in econometrics. So that's what I used writing my thesis. And then I was like, oh, I actually still kind of like this. So the curiosity was back. But while I was still studying, I started working for this green NGO, working on sustainable agriculture. I did it for two different NGOs for 5 years, because I wanted to have an impact in the world. I thought we should change the world for good, and I was working with like a big supermarket in the Netherlands, and the farmers that are delivering to them, and all the like supply chain parties in between. And it was a very interesting and challenging project because it taught me about project management and stakeholder management. I was very fortunate that I could kind of grow under the wing of a very experienced colleague from one of the partnering companies. So he taught me the ropes, and then I went to another youth organization, which was a bit more chaotic, but also a lot more fun. And then after that, working for 5 years in this space, I thought like, well, I've been able to develop a pretty decent network. Why don't I try freelancing or some entrepreneurship? And we were doing some general innovation in the space, and we wanted to focus mostly on supply chain innovation. So, how does food get from the farmer to the consumer? But also on ag tech. There was like this big hype coming from Silicon Valley. It was like they had all kinds of different tech. So they had like ag tech, like agriculture and technology, but also ad tech, like education and technology. And the atmosphere coming from Silicon Valley was kind of like they will disrupt anything. Like they understand it better, and they have like the brains and the technology, and let's disrupt agriculture and do it differently. And it was very appealing. Like we organized a trade mission with some Dutch companies, and we saw some interesting startups as well as corporates. And the thing that drew my attention was data. This was in 2014, 2015. Everyone was talking about big data, but it was so mystified in a sense. So I started asking everyone all kinds of questions. Not initially because I didn't want to look stupid, but then eventually I started asking the dumb questions, and nobody could give me answers. It was all it was all shrouded in a mystical veil. And then I decided like, okay, I'm gonna find out for myself. And I ended up doing some freelance work in data for some pretty serious clients, but it was all still in the beginning phase. So I had the chance to hire some data scientists, do some work there. And after I did like two bigger assignments, I felt like, well, if I want to do it right, I have to understand it better. So I decided to become a data scientist myself. And yeah, from there on, I picked up coding, also brushed up on my math, and kind of went from there. Yeah. And that's 9 years ago now.
Wow. And since that, so you've been in data science, and then you did some data engineering. And how did you get into MLOps, and how long have you been into MLOps?
Yeah, so the data engineering was with a consultancy who mostly did that. They did like BI, ETL, and the Microsoft stack. They did it really well. And our data and analytics team was about 50 people, and we were like three and a half data scientists on an island. Um, so it, and most of the work we did for the clients was like BI, ETL. So yeah, that's why I did some of that work. But also, that's where I did my first MLOps, and MLOps didn't exist yet. And it was always a kind of big question mark, like if we built these data science solutions. So we were all coding in R back then, and we had all these like R Markdown notebooks. Like, how are we going to run them in production? So a few things we did is we would convert the notebook just to scripts, and then the scripts would be executed by cron job or something. But there was no real tooling out there. Like in the cloud, some things were happening, and then Azure had like Azure ML Studio. So for like a really big client, we deployed a solution there, and it was predicting some important forecasting numbers for like a couple of thousand gyms across Europe. Basically, like the expected signups. And yeah, the tooling was still very basic, but it was such a rush to sort of do this in the cloud and have like an API endpoint, and it felt more serious. So that's when I got my first taste, I guess. And then after that, I moved to another consultancy. uh, yeah, tools started getting developed a bit more. We served the client with Databricks, which was still like in the earlier stages. And I was doing all this like data science work and lead data science work, but I felt putting the solutions in production, yeah, it resonated more with me. Also, with the data science work, yeah, when you've done it a few times, you kind of know the workflow and the project cycle. And to be honest, like a lot of the data science projects were not reaching their potential or their end stage, which now we have some statistics on. Like some people say like 70% fails, others say like 90% fails. But this is what I saw. Like we were working really hard with clients, with people from the business side, putting in all this effort with all these really, yeah, young and clever people, and not really delivering in the end. So I did that a few times, few big projects like, that ended up basically going nowhere in the end. And I felt like this thing with putting data science in production, which was not called MLOps back then, it felt more concrete, like it felt more attainable. So I felt like the value I was adding there, was actually, more valuable in a sense that it was more useful. So it appealed to me, and then again, I went to another job. I was internally at a company, and they were still running, data science solutions in a very archaic way. And that's when I saw an opportunity. Like, okay, we're gonna do this according to best practices. We're gonna lift and shift everything, and then yeah, I started learning, from a few different resources. I also had the luck that we had a consultant, a guy who came only once every 2 weeks, but who's like super experienced. He worked with Go Data Driven, which is like to me one of the best, data science, at least MLOps consultancies in the world. They've rebranded to Xebia now, but they're international, I think. But this brand, Go Data Driven in the Netherlands, they had like so many people contributing to open source frameworks, really high level in their consultancy population. And he had been there for 8 years. So I was lucky to work with him. And basically, over the course of a year, he showed me the ropes. And yeah, I got so excited about all this stuff, like all the things I'd been reading about, but never really got concrete. I mean, it was hard to find concrete examples. They were definitely out there, but then you weren't sure that yet, like if you're doing it right or if there's a better solution. He could explain it all to me, and that's when I knew, like 100%, like this is my thing. This is going to be my thing. I'm just going to work on MLOps.
Awesome. This is a fun sensation when we're looking for something and we don't know what we're looking for, but we know that when we hear people say things, we know if it's this that we're looking at or not. And that maybe was confusing, just saying it. But that's very interesting. So you have such an interesting perspective. I feel that it's interesting to see that you have a very multicultural background from your studies, and you went on literature and so on. So I'd like to know more a bit how can that helps you. But just before that, based on the on what you shared right now, if I come back to the technologies, I'm always curious, even though it's not about the technology, it's about the ideas. But
Hmm.
what technologies have you seen rise? You mentioned Databricks before. Since you got interested in ML ops, and like until today, like what are like the main things that you're looking at, or that you would use if you had to start a project from scratch and you had full choice on what you will work with, independently of the client databases and systems and so on. Like you decide, you have you do whatever you
It's
want.
like a greenfield situation. Okay, so if you're starting with MLOps, I think, three things are really important. You need some type of CI pipeline. It'll make your life so much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, to have some linting in there, some code smells, to have some discipline on the unit tests,
Mm,
maybe some packaging or some package registry. I mean, yeah, you definitely want some type of CI pipeline, whichever works for your use
mm,
case. Um, then the second thing that's really important, I think, is your model management. So you'd want something for model registry, basically being able to keep track of these model objects or artifacts that you are building. Um, and maybe even taking a step back in the land of data science, version control. Version control is like the bare minimum, you would say, but I keep seeing it within the data science space. Like people, sometimes they've been working on something for months, and it lives on like their desktop, right? It's not even like in Dropbox or OneDrive, and then something happens and all the work is lost. So these three things, they're really the bare minimum. And for this, yeah, I really like GitLab. I like their CI. I like their roadmap with the whole model ops thing they're doing. So they now added some MLflow integration. I really love their documentation. I really believe that if you're coming from a point of just being a pure data scientist, maybe, and you don't have like this expert next to you, you could still build quite a few good things just by the support of their documentation. I feel like it's really a place um, for developers by developers. I really feel that in everything. So, yeah, I'm a GitLab groupie, so I'm gonna drop that here.
mm. Understood. All right. So, okay, we have a CI/CD pipeline, and we have a model registration. Do you have like preferences in terms of clouds, GCP, Azure, AWS, others?
Um, Yes, an interesting question. So I've mostly worked with Azure and AWS. I feel Azure is really big in the Dutch market. Um, it kind of depends. Like if you're using these tools and they're hosted on the cloud, it doesn't really matter where you are, right? But if you're using the native tools, then it does matter. And um, yeah, I think it's on the one hand, it's a matter of preference, but some of the native tools are better than others. I think if you're looking for a turnkey kind of solution, then SageMaker is pretty interesting.
Hmm.
So that's AWS. And then for Azure, I don't know. Like it's been a while since I've worked with Azure machine learning and the whole data stack in Azure, and everything's changing so fast. So I feel like I cannot really speak on it. My current client is like Microsoft first, so we are like in Azure DevOps, but all the other tools they are like the open source tools, right? So,
Mm.
um, so yeah, I think it's hard to speak on a particular cloud vendor.
Yeah, I can.
Google, I didn't work with much. I checked it
Uh-huh.
out, but never like on
Uh-huh.
an operational level.
Huh. I've heard very great things about Google. Okay, awesome. That was a little gap. Well,
Yeah,
yes, please.
yeah. I just want to agree with you. I'm also hearing great things about Google, but for some reason we don't see them much in the Dutch market. I
Mm.
know they are trying to get there, like have some market penetration with some consulting partners and some discount everything. Like if you want a project implemented by an IT or data partner, they might pay for like half the hours,
Mm.
even if the sum is really high. So they are trying, but I'm not seeing them too much in the Netherlands.
Hmm. Awesome. All right. Now that we went a little bit more in the like tools and technical things, I'd like to ask you a question about bridging the gap between technical and non-technical stakeholders when you're trying to deliver value. You mentioned before that a lot of data science projects maybe end up in the cemetery of data science where it never appears in production in like months and years of work that will never be used. So coming back to non-technical and technical stakeholders, how do you approach projects, and how do you communicate, and how do you speak about MLOps in general on both perspective?
Mhm.
There are many questions, but you can do a
Yeah,
brief.
so it's an interesting subject, bridging the gap between technical and non-technical. I When I first heard people speaking about this, so like 2017,
Mm,
2018, I was at this consultancy and we were doing the onboarding, and for a week you are with this group and everyone keeps doing the same introductions, and there was this one young guy. He was like, straight out of uni, and like had the fancy suit and the fancy glasses, and all he kept saying, like, I really want to focus on bridging this gap between technical and business. And I was like rolling my eyes kind of at that, not literally, but quietly, and thinking like, yeah, this is always the talk of the guys with the fancy suits, and but he cannot even code and he doesn't understand it. And well, fast forward 7 years, like, boy, was I wrong. I think it's actually one of the most important things in our industry. And then the question is, how do we do it? In many different ways, I think. I think one of the most important things is to ask so many questions, and to write stuff down. Um, I see a lot of people in our space, they are sending a lot. You have, like, in communication, you have the sender and you have the receiver, and I feel like it's getting so cluttered, and AI and data has like this hype around it, and there's a lot of smart people moving through the space, so people are hyped and people want to show how clever they are, and they are sending a lot. But asking so many questions and actively listening and making sure you remember that stuff, and you cannot remember all of that stuff, so you have to write everything down. Like, if you sit with someone, if you have like a conversation for half an hour, you should have like an A4 full of notes usually. So I think that's where it starts, from both sides in a sense, but I think the responsibility is more on our side, on the technical side, to grasp the business side, because it is more attainable. The other way, yeah, is complicated. Like, if someone from the business side who understands their domain and their subject matter has to understand everything about what we do, it does take more time. So I think the responsibility is more on us. Um, so yeah, listening and writing, that is super important. Then the other thing, I think, is that the way you design processes really matters. So we're living in sort of this agile world, and we have like roadmaps and rituals and all of this stuff, and we try to deliver on the backlog in sprints or Kanban, whatever. But one of the things I see lacking is like proper process design. So when I started working, so would be then like be like 14 years ago, we wrote these big project plans. We wrote them because we tried to get support from the decision makers, or we tried to get funding from
mm,
private or public parties, and they were like 100-page documents, in sustainable agriculture, but also in IT.
mhm,
And it's not the holy grail to do this, but what it does do is, because it has this sort of structure, if you're using a certain methodology, it does kind of force you to think about everything before it happens. And you will be wrong, and it will go differently once you start executing. But because you did this exercise where you had to think about it and then sort of eloquently put it down, or at least in a way that someone else can also understand it, yeah, you're much better prepared, to execute and also to adjust, because it has been activated within you and within the team and the stakeholders. So that is something that I see lacking, and yeah, when you do this, it also automatically starts bridging the gap between business and technology, because there are different stakes in the game. You have to think about the interests of all these stakeholders, and make sense of it. Um, so those are two things I would say that are really important. That in some places they are still very much in place, but in many they're sort of quickly dissolved, I think.
Right. Right. uh, Agile method is great, but having the big picture is getting lost in the process sometimes. And what you're saying is basically just focusing on at the beginning, taking the time to like just having the clear vision, even though the vision will change with time. This is a this is a reality, but it
Mm,
really helps. And yeah, and it is also a reference point for when we're having a doubt or where there is like a question or so on. Like we can always pass this document, and nowadays we can also build a chatbot on top of this big document to like retrieve any specific part of it and have this
mm.
cool quick answers for people who are like joining maybe on a 5-year project or 10-year project. Maybe someone who is joining on the middle, instead of asking everyone all the questions, they can have like this big document. That's very interesting. Um, I'm very curious to ask you about leadership and building teams and culture. So, that being said, agile, doing this work at the beginning of projects, but more in general, what are the lessons that you learned in the different projects that you worked on? So here it can really be like whatever you want, but
Okay.
if I would need to ask further, I'm really curious to ask you about, once you have like goals clear and you want to get things done, how do you build your team? How do you choose your talent? How do you retain talents? So this is kind of a two-part question. Maybe your lessons in
Yeah.
industry and your lessons on like building team, scaling talent, and talent retention.
Okay, so your first question is lessons from projects. Yeah, one of the things I guess I underestimated, or you sometimes you can forget, is you have to keep selling your project. Like sometimes you have the buy-in and the decisions have been made, and you have the budget, but you have to keep selling it to the right stakeholders. And one thing that I learned in the data science and ML space is, I think you're not going to succeed without executive buy-in. So a lot of people want some sort of cool project and they're like below the strategic level or just close to it, but you need buy-in from sort of the highest level, depending on the scope and size of the project, of course, as
Mm-hmm.
well. But this is super important because the data projects are usually cross-departmental, and they are usually initiated in one or two departments, and then they start touching others. And yeah, if the level above that doesn't tie it together or gives you a certain mandate, or tells the other department leaders like, hey, you actually need to buy into this as well, you're going to be in for a tough ride, because you might do all the things right, like data engineering, data quality, think about the value of the use case, you build like good model, it's performing, you're testing it, it's all going well, but then the output of the model does something in the organization. So like the decision making will change, and it will affect multiple departments. And a lot of people, they will be conservative or adverse to it. They're like, well, this is the way we do it, and now there's this black box, yeah, whatever, AI, machine learning, is going to tell us what to do. And then they start asking questions, and then this whole part of adoption, and managing stakeholders maybe outside of your project scope that you initially didn't think you would touch, that is something you really have to think about. And you can't always think about it in advance, so you need that executive support. um, yeah, this is one of the big lessons, I think.
Hmm. Interesting. Just coming back on like just commenting back on this one, and I'll ask you again the scaling and teams and so on right after. But would you say that you said something that interested me before? You said that um, stakeholders are non-technical or just maybe business in general. I think it would be too much of asking to ask someone. Like, I think it's easier for someone who understands the technical things to just understand the problem, so that we have the vision on, okay, how can I solve the problem, having my knowledge. And if I ask it on the other way, like, I can't expect someone from business to just find the solution based on like the architectures and like what I have in mind and what model I'll
Mm.
do, etc. So this is that to me makes total sense. And if we come back to what you said, it feels like technical stakeholders or like technical speaking to business in some way or another. We need to convince that this is the right approach, and we need to explain with plain words what it's doing, and being able to like teach in some form of way, just so that we build confidence around what's being built through time, and that people use those things. Would you like to comment on this? Does that sounds correct? And would you like to add more things, or maybe your experience on that?
Yeah, no. So definitely, look, just to come back to that, it's not so black and white as I said it before. It's a two-way street. I think it's very important that there's understanding from both sides,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
for sure. But yeah, you said a lot of things. I have a lot of thoughts. To build trust, you also
Mm.
mentioned, I think that is
Yeah,
very
building
important,
trust. How to build
and
trust with business?
also to explain it in the right way. So maybe in simpler words, or not go too much into detail.
Yeah,
I think this is a key aspect. I think when I see people presenting from the technical side, so in the role of analytics translator or
yeah.
tech translator, or maybe
Uh-huh.
they're just an engineer or data scientist explaining something, the level of detail is always too high. I think you always need an extra two iterations. Imagine if you're prompting to ChatGPT or something, or just talking to a human and say like, okay, this is nice, but make it simpler and make it shorter. And then,
Yeah, more
the new
concise.
result comes out and it's okay.
Yeah,
So this is also good, but more simpler and even shorter. And then
yeah,
you get there. You need like a couple of iterations. And usually people from the technical side will
yeah,
be like, but I already made it short and simple. I'm
yeah,
like, no,
yeah.
actually, you have 18 slides. You're explaining how gradient boosting is working. Like these are actual things I see in practice. That is not important. You need to go down to like three slides, and they all need to have three bullet points. This is basically like what you need to do, and from these three by three, you will have needed to explain the added value and what's
Yeah.
important right now.
Uh,
And maybe you can do more slides, whatever. But this is like, keep it small, keep it simple.
uh. Secure,
Um,
fast, and cost management. Yeah, that's three bullet points.
yeah, yeah. Think about what they care about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't
So
explain the transformer. Okay, so let me explain about neural networks. Yeah,
yeah, and
10
and it
minutes in.
always
Yes.
happens. Yeah, and then people kind of check out, and they also feel they don't feel comfortable when they are being presented with this subject matter that they don't understand. Like, imagine sitting in a room and everyone speaking your language, like English or French, but it's mixed with this other weird language, and all the key points they are mentioning, all the nouns and a couple of the verbs, are words you don't understand. It's a totally weird experience, but
Mm,
that's what it sounds like when you're outside of tech.
yeah. Yeah, and if the goal, because it really depends, like if I want to present some work on like maybe some like CTO staff or like project manager whom have a technical background and so on. Maybe in those situations it's interesting because it showcases the concepts that I understood well, that I followed best practices, and so it can be valued. And those can happen also in like code reviews and so on. And this is the moments to like discuss those things. But if the goal of the meeting, and I really like, and I feel like ChatGPT is awesome to that, ChatGPT or any cloud provider, LLM
Yeah,
that we want
yeah.
to use. But
Any of them?
it's
Yeah,
easy. It's so easy to use ChatGPT on the background that I
yeah.
don't know. Like having this tool to like just say things more concise, more to the point, or like sometimes I just grab a bunch of thoughts that I have and I just paste it and I say organize my thoughts, or like just make this more concise and go to the point, and this is the goal. And just by me framing what I'm looking for in this process, I'm getting clearer on the message that I want to deliver, and I it just do the job for me to like just clean everything.
Mm. Yeah.
I don't know how does that sound to you, or but I think, yeah, I think it's clear. It's a really good point. Like just having clear on the intentions of what do I want to communicate and what is the common goal here, and let me just pick the information that is related and throw everything. And sometimes we don't like to throw things out. This is
Mm.
like something that is when we create things, we don't want to like leave them apart because we want to show them. But I feel like me not showing all those things that are behind on this specific context show more than just me trying to show everything that I have in mind and that I went through and so on. What do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, no, I think you're touching on a key point here. In a sense, we're talking about empathy, but I think it appears in two ways when you think about what their position is. So I think you have a business context where you really have to think about like what is the common goal you said. So what are their goals and what are our goals? And then you have these methods like, oh, you have to think about it from position one, this is your position, and then position two, this is their position, and position three is like the position of the organization. So there's this business side to it and these methodologies. But I think it's also really important to think about the true empathy, so the human aspect. So how are they experiencing this project or this
Mm,
process or this meeting? And I
mm,
think if you are good in this, um, then you are more likely to succeed, because I think a lot of the work in tech and data is non-technical in that sense. It's
mm,
working with humans, and
mm,
you also already touched on building trust. So um, yeah, I think like finding common ground or having empathy and also identifying what is not common is super
mm,
important.
mm. Yeah, you're very right. And I'm curious about how your um, like background helped you having this empathy with different kind of persons. So that would one, but that's one thing. But you can also combine it if you want, because I'm super curious about building teams and culture,
Okay.
like making people feel good. So if you want to do both in one, feel free.
Yeah. No, the first one is a great question because I finally get to justify my English literature degree. Like the
I was,
most useless
I was
degree
saying,
you can get. I went for that. Okay,
I wouldn't say
maybe
that.
no, but no. So I think we are working with people, and it's about human relations. And what I think is interesting about the humanities degree is that it does teach you about the history of us humans, and what you will find when you are reading this canonical literature and all these philosophers. Like you kind of go back 2,000 years, um, you'll kind of find out that people haven't changed much. They had like the same hopes and dreams and the same like worries and challenges, and the whole context changed. Like the technology changed, and like if we look outside, and before we couldn't maybe not even look outside because we were outside, but it all changed massively. But then when you look at the human experience and if you see what they wrote down, like over the past 2 millennia, you're like, oh, kind of still the same. So understanding humans and understanding dynamics between us as humans and being aware of that, it can really help you in any industry, and especially in tech. I think you can be of like great added value. Um, so that is how my background helps me, I guess. And another thing is I came from agriculture. So in agriculture, like nobody cared about agriculture when I was working in it. So like 13, 14 years ago, But we were working with a lot of farmers, and it was a much more conservative industry. And I was doing innovation in that space, and we were working with almost 100 of them, and the supermarket, and we had like the sustainable innovations. They didn't cost much more money, but they were like really good for the planet and all these different aspects. And still, we had to convince these stakeholders, and they were challenging stakeholders. They were really like, anything you will say, the core energy of people will be more like this, like, I don't know. So that was my trial by fire, and then
Mm,
I discovered tech, and it attracted me because of this reason. And everyone was like open to new ideas, like, oh, that's such a cool idea. You
mm,
should try to find funding. Yeah, I know this guy. I'll introduce you. Oh,
mm,
and this woman there. Yeah, I mean, let's talk. And then people will still be critical, like they will roast your idea, but in a
mm,
sort of constructive way. There's like,
mhm,
I have some critical questions, but together we will sharpen your idea, like try to make it better instead of like, no, this is not going to work, as a
mm.
sort of ground energy. Um, so my background, I, I got hard training, and then I came to tech and I was like, oh, actually, it's okay. It has different challenges still, but and then on your other question of building teams, yeah, it's not a straightforward thing.
Okay.
I would say there, yeah, there are many different aspects to it. There are
Mm,
many different aspects to it. So it depends on the situation. Are you building a new team, or is a team already in place?
mm,
What type of organization is it? How is the culture? Um, but a few things I learned is like, you can you cannot change an organizational culture. It's like the hardest thing to do out of all the
mm.
transformations.
Okay.
This is what research shows. This is also my experience, and it starts at the top, right? So if the board is like this or that, or the directors, then yeah, good luck. But you can create a mini culture within your MLOps team, or your data science and MLOps chapter, or and one of the things that is important is joyfulness, I think.
Hmm.
When people are joyful, it's easy for them to work. They
Mm.
come to work happy, they leave work happy. Not every day, of course, but in
Yeah.
general,
Mhm.
they're much more productive, they're much more helpful and proactive. So you have to really try and create this joy in your teams, also for yourself. And the joy, it gives back a lot because it attracts people. Like other people in their organization will say like, oh, can I join your team? You always seem to be having so much fun. And also in the recruiting and hiring, it will allow you to hire good people, because they will
Mm.
kind of notice and feel that this is a part of the team, like in the interviews and the assessments. So I think joy is very important. And there's a lot of empty phrases, out there in the, the corporate world, and all these games, and we're a family, and but to create like a true joyful team, yeah, you need to be like open with each other, vulnerable. You need a really good culture of feedback, and then you can build on that, I think. And feedback is a key point for, that's the main point for growth. Whichever is your starting point, good or bad, feedback is the main point for growth. So you need good tools for feedback. What I usually do with my teams is I have like a bi-monthly retrospective, or we have some format with the Silmo boat and the post-its and whatever. But we also, on the other month, we have a bi-monthly feedback session where everyone in the team has to give everyone feedback. It's
Publicly.
kind of long, huh?
Publicly.
Yeah,
Like in front of
publicly in
everyone.
the
Okay.
group. You're like with 10 people, and like I would have to say to 9 other people, like, this is what I think you're doing good, and this is what you need to improve. So you can do the math. It can balloon quickly. I wouldn't do it with more than 10 people. I would not have a team bigger than 10 people, to be honest. But it can get kind of awkward sometimes, and kind of vulnerable or painful. You don't really want to be there and do it for like 2 hours, but it's so important. That's
Mm.
where the growth is. And usually, everyone comes out and you are relieved. And yeah, that's how you grow, by being honest and vulnerable with each other.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting. I
Then I
was
would like.
thinking.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Please
no,
go.
sorry, please.
No, no, you please go.
I'm curious now. You choose. Well, like you wanted to add
Oh,
one thing more?
no, no, please go. I can add it later.
Okay, okay, okay. I was based on that. I was reflecting, and I think I'm curious about different things that I wanted to come back on, giving feedback, etc. And you said something about joyfulness, so I'll put it in my words, which is like I feel like people are happy if they feel like they're growing. So obviously it
Hmm.
won't be like a fairy tale where every day I go to job and I'm like, yeah, I mean it could be like you can train your mind for that and things and like psychology and so on, cool. But I feel like long term the growth and the people we are around and the confidence that we have and the like feeling that we're being pushed at our edge and like being the best and learning and having like guidance and so on, I feel like those things are what we could define here as like happy. And I would like link growth to happiness. Do you confirm, or how would you describe joyfulness or happiness in that in that context?
Yeah, 100%. It's a really important element of it. People are ambitious and curious, usually in our sector, and they want to be able to grow and develop in different levels. So it's really important to have this aspect as part of the work, and not only to have like learning budget, but to actively think about it together and to make like a match between what the company needs and what the team needs and what they want, like what their hopes and dreams are, and also to have perspective. So not just think about like, hey, we have this budget for this quarter and maybe you can do a course, but to think a bit about the bigger picture. um, and for learning and development or performance and growth, there are all kinds of amazing methods out there. Like a lot of research has been done. Um, some companies do it really well, some organizations, others don't. When I meet people who specialize in this, yeah, I'm always so like interested and humbled because they're like the true facilitators, and they know all the tools and methods. And so, yeah, to seek them out or to seek these methods out, I think it can really help. Uh,
Hmm. And what
yeah.
I really like about what you said is like this decentralized way of building culture in a company. So obviously the board will like put the color kind of depending on who is on the board and like what are their mindset and so on. But like then afterwards, when the company grow, having the subcultures or decentralized cultures in the company that of course in some way are aligned with the culture of the board and the overall company. But I feel that this is a very interesting thing, like having uh, culture decentralized in the organization.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. It works up until a certain point because you still have to deal with the organization sometimes, or
Yeah.
sometimes it's good and it's all good. But yeah.
Hmm. All right. Makes sense. I'd like to ask you about the labor market, like the AI. You've been a data scientist for a long time in the industry, now working with MLOps and so on. What is your vision on AI in general in the field, and like what are the impacts that you would expect in the upcoming years, if that's a question I can even ask?
Mhm. Yeah, so I'd be happy to answer it, but if I can still add my last point on
Please,
building
I wanted
culture.
to. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, so I think um, it's really important to have like a release valve
Okay.
in the team, because um, it's easy to build pressure and like frustration and animosity in the office environment, and we see each other as colleagues, and it's hard to do it sometimes, also in feedback sessions, like it's a bit. But if you're outside of the office and you're doing something together, like you have all kinds of trips in the Netherlands. It's like a huge industry, like team days, blah blah blah. Not all of them are good, but usually if you do it and then you sit down and you have a drink and you have a meal, and everyone's a bit more loose, it also really gives you the opportunity to give feedback in a different way, more like person to person, and sometimes also to take ownership. So maybe sometime maybe it can happen like someone's really in your allergy in the office, or they did this one thing, and then in this other setting you can really say like, when you did this thing I thought you were a shithead, but to be honest I was being a shithead too, and you're kind of okay actually, yeah, you're okay. And then everything's so much easier smoothed out than if you have to sit in your office together with your manager or HR, and all becomes so heavy. So having moments of release, or that can act as a release valve in informal settings, are key to building a good team.
That's awesome. That's super interesting. What do you think about like the full remote companies? Would you deal with that?
Um, I've never been in one. I worked in lockdown, of course, but um, I think they can work really well. For sure, 100%, it can work. There are many examples of it. I think it also depends on what people need in their professional life. So it can work really well for some people to be in one, and for others, they really need like some days at the office, and some people even need like a full work week at the office.
Mm,
Um, so to each his own, but I do think what research has shown, if you can, there, if you look at communication studies or
mm,
like labor psychology, is that there are some things lost in remote communication. We got so much better at it during COVID, I think. So maybe the studies should be updated. But when you're having face-to-face communication and you're having all these non-verbal cues, and you're closer to someone, you're more in like their space, their
yeah,
body language, or their
yeah.
aura, or whatever, their energy, there's a lot happening there, and a lot of
Mm,
the communication is in there. So I think it can really help in certain types of meetings or decision making. um, and you won't have that in a fully remote company. But yeah, I think you can build like $1 billion company fully remote, especially in tech. All the tools have moved to the cloud, sort of.
yeah.
It's also possible to do all the work planning and the storing of data and code, and it has become so easy. I feel like we're living in the age of luxury, developer wise.
Mm, mm. Awesome. Yeah, I like it. Awesome. Would you like to comment on labor agreements or like labor market impacts with AI? And just before
Sure.
that, I was just reflecting about what you shared, but I really, really like all the tips that you shared to build a healthy culture and environment. And I feel that even if like the points could be, I mean, when we hear those tips, we all like agree that that would be great. But like for one leadership, like from a leadership perspective, we know it, but we don't necessarily apply it. Or like you said, like feedbacks, it sucks. It does not feel great. Like saying,
Mm.
but afterward it feels better. And this is like, I feel like I like to compare this to like going to the gym. It doesn't feel great. Maybe after some time it feels great because like we've trained our mind, but it doesn't feel great in the moment to be like pushing very hard to the limits and so on. But on the long run, it adds up. It is cumulative. And I feel like all what you discuss, like if implemented well and through time, are like very exponential and have a direct impact on growth from all perspective.
Yeah, and it's a nice analogy, and it actually you can continue it, because similarly to going to the gym, it does become easier. When you have to go to the gym like the first 2 months, you're out of
Mm,
shape, and oh, it's such a hassle to keep the discipline.
mm,
But when you build the habits, and when you become more trained,
mm,
same with giving feedback, it does become easier, and you actually start liking it at some
mm.
point. You're like, oh yes, feedback session today, or
Yeah,
like, yes, I'm
yeah,
going to the
like
gym, let's go.
let's grow, let's reflect. And it also like,
Yeah.
because I feel when one start to implement those systems, the harder part is we didn't build muscles in the gym at the beginning. We didn't build the confidence to like apply and do it properly. And so maybe some people are more like not into this, not into the feedback sessions, and so people, but if applied through time with consistency, this disappears because it becomes something that we do. And so
Mm,
basically the thoughts change directions, and everyone accept and embrace like the feedback session, and everyone looks forward to it. And like we can implement things like everyone is going to define their own kind of objectives based on like their specific levels, but publicly, like you said, giving feedback publicly, saying publicly what are my goals in the next months, I feel, and everyone is here to listen. And so this is like also I'm getting my own results in my own hands, and this
mm,
serves the company and also myself. And I feel that this is also very powerful.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and sometimes powerful things can happen in those sessions. And the interesting thing when you talk about leadership is it's not about the manager, or anyone can be courageous. And when giving feedback, courage is so important because it usually ties into being vulnerable. And I've had many experiences with project teams, or companies I worked in. Like when the first person has been courageous to be vulnerable, then everything opens up. Something happens and someone will respond like, "Oh, when that happened, actually, like, I really felt for you," and blah blah, and then I cried, and blah, and then everyone's like, "Oh, now I can be vulnerable too," and the whole room opens up, and then the team opens up. Something changes. So you have to be courageous when giving feedback, also the hard feedback and also the vulnerable feedback.
Mm,
And I think the same goes for team building. Like if you do this release valve, you can do something really safe. So really like standard, day, and you do something, and you have some meeting and you have dinner. But I think you should be silly, because when you do something weird, if you are more courageous, it also will open up the team usually, because you have experienced something new together, and that
mm,
builds a bond and trust. So
mm.
yeah, if you
Yeah.
are like the leader or the team member that organizes the day, be courageous and make it really weird in a sense, and it will pay dividends. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I love this tip. Awesome.
Yeah.
uh, would you like to comment on the impacts of AI, data science? Just a quick note here. I'm super impressed based on like the evolution, like you mentioned history before, and like how human haven't changed much. And it's crazy to think that just Hadoop and Spark were like around 2013, 2015, like the big rise of like big data and building all the things. And it's crazy on the old time scale how little time have passed and how huge the transformation have happened in the last 10 to 20 years. So that being said, I would assume that it is very very hard to predict what's going to happen or not, but do you have an intuition or things that you think we should look out for?
Yeah. So I think we need to be aware of all kinds of biases in data. So not only towards like underrepresented and minority groups, but just the whole. There like will be a lot of biases in models that we don't see. So the output is still not good in a sense, and the way you can kind of find out about this is to, for example, interact with an LLM on the subject that you have the most expertise on. So if you are like an expert in something, and then you start like talking to one of the LLMs, you will find out that they're okay, but they just missed the point still. So we should really be aware of the quality still, and it might change fast. Then another thing, yeah, the impact of AI on the world. Like, who knows where it's gonna go? Who am I to say something on it? It's gonna be, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens. But I do think if you are working in our space, where it goes from data to ML to AI and who knows what, I think you have to stay aware of the fact that there is still a lot of low hanging fruit.
Mm,
I think loads of people are going to try and shoot for the moon,
mm,
and there will be hype as well on the boardroom and in the highest level, and people will read their like literature, or their attend their events, or magazines like Gartner, Harvard Business Review, whatever. And there, just like with the data revolution now, there will be an explicit and an implicit pressure to do something with this. You can't be at the country club with all the other CEOs or whatever where they are. I don't know. It's not my world. And then, oh, are you already doing something with AI? You cannot say no at one point. So everyone will sort of get pressured into it. But I think for us, the experts, it's important to stay aware of the low hanging fruit, and a lot of simple solutions that have been around for decades can add value. And even, looking at the data science use cases, um, you can build like all these ensemble models and stuff. But sometimes you can also add like a lot of value, because the project might take months if you just like take a few characteristics and do like a group by, and then take like the median for every group. And in that sense, you build like a baseline model or sort of decision tree, but you can even do it in SQL, and then the business will have something to work with within a very short time span. And that's low hanging fruit. And we should always sort of stay in this mindset, like how can we deliver something quickly that actually does add value.
awesome. Yeah, I really like this idea. Like if we take back your tip from before, which is have like a big guideline of what we're trying to achieve, but then in the details, what are we trying to achieve short term? Okay, you need
Mm-hmm.
that. This solution could take 3 months. This one week. Maybe I'll
Mm-hmm.
start with the 1 week one. And if you want something more performance, then we'll work on a version two, like more complex with more systems and so on. Yeah, I really like this idea because sometimes we like try to over optimize something, but maybe in a few days we could have a very useful thing that is better than not having anything, and it can really provide a lot of value. And I like the idea of iterations, which is kind of agile, but like
Mm-hmm.
iterating on, okay, does that still make sense? Do we want to over optimize on this, or are we good right now and there is some other priority that have like maybe more leverage in terms of time and efforts and so on? Awesome.
Yeah.
I'd have like three more questions, if that
Okay,
sounds correct.
cool.
The first one is a short and effective one, which is how um, do you have tips for everyone who is listening who are both like new in the field and more advanced? Um, so do you have tips for like those two profiles in terms of MLOps
In terms of MLOps,
or in terms of like if you have tips in general, like just
so
whatever you feel like sharing?
sure, yeah. So for the more advanced people,
Okay.
I think I already said it, but we should listen more. It's also a tip to myself.
Mm,
I think when we open up the floor for others, and even have like the courage to let silences drop,
mm,
people will step in, and they will contribute really interesting and valuable things.
mm,
So the room is too full, too many senders. Just listen more, the advanced people.
mm,
And for the starters, something I also deal with, but you might have imposter syndrome, and that's okay. Um, That's just something I would want to say to people starting. I got rid of mine sort of very recently. It took me a long time, but yeah, getting more comfortable over the years with the fact that I know so little really helps me relax and just take it like one step at a time. Being in the data space, I don't know if you've seen Game of Thrones. Lots of people have seen it. I guess some people haven't. But when Jon Snow goes over the wall, he meets his companion and later lover, and she says to him, "You know nothing, Jon Snow, about this other world out there." This is how I felt for a long time in data. Like every time there was something new, and I felt like I know nothing, and it's okay. There's so much out there. It takes time to learn. So just be content with the steps that you take every day. Be proud of the work you are doing. I shared the post this week, something new I learned, that you should make a brag list, a list of your accomplishments to fight imposter syndrome and to help yourself set goals and to motivate yourself. I think this is a great tip. So look back on where you are, and if you even if you're starting now in the field, you've already done so much to come to the point where you are now. All these schools and degrees and all this effort, and you can trust in those things you did, and the skills and the mentality you had that put you in the place where you are now. They will drive you forward. So just relax. It's gonna be
Mm,
fine.
awesome. I like this tip. All right, second question, which is where can people find more about you? We didn't much talk about all the work that you do on LinkedIn, the like communication, sharing value, and so on. So if you want, you can also comment on that. But I would love to hear like when can people find more about you? Is it like LinkedIn? Do you have a blog, newsletter, and so on? And yeah.
Yeah, so I'm both blogging and posting a lot on LinkedIn. Started blogging 8 months ago. I'm gonna continue doing that, and I'm posting so much on LinkedIn. Like, if you would have told me, like, at the beginning of this summer, that I would be one of these crazy people posting on LinkedIn every day and even like sharing selfies, I would have told you, like, no way, like, this is crazy. It's kind of cringy. I'll never do that. But yeah, we did it when we started blogging to promote ourselves, and here I am. So yeah, and if you want to find out something, yeah, I mean, always feel free to shoot me a message. I try to answer all the messages. I'm still coping, to do that. Sometimes there's a delay of a few weeks,
Hmm.
but I'm open to connect and engage with anyone.
Awesome. And the links of your LinkedIn will be in the comments. So before asking you the last question, which is the message for the Let's Talk AI community, I'd like to ask you a question for the next guest. So what would you like me to ask for the next guest? It can be anything related to like MLOps, AI data, everything, anything.
So I would like to know about their in the space about their highest highs and their lowest lows, both sides of the coin. Like your
Okay.
most embarrassing fail or moment or most disastrous project,
Okay.
and maybe the proudest moment, and it
Hmm.
can be anything, or the most joyful moment.
Okay.
We
Okay.
need the min and the max of the range of this experience.
Awesome. I will definitely ask this one. Let's see what the answer will be. And last but not least, do you have, well, first of all, to anyone who is still listening at this point of the episode, thanks a lot for spending this time with us. That means a lot. I hope that you learned as much as I did in this episode. Feel free to subscribe and like if you enjoyed this episode. And thanks again for listening. Now, the last question is, do you have a message that we can keep? I feel that you share a lot of value in this episode, and I learned a lot of techniques in a lot of subjects. But do you have one last thing that we can take home?
Yeah, make sure you keep having enough fun. It's okay to grind and hustle and push yourself. It's part of the development and growth, but you have to keep checking in with yourself, like, are you in it for the right reasons, and are you having fun? Because life is short, and I think we can have fun at work as well, and it helps so much. So remember
Awesome.
that.
Amazing. Well, Raphael, thanks again for coming on the show, and I wish you to have an amazing day.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. You had great questions. I really appreciate you. Thank you, and have a great day as well.